Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
You're listening to Bloomberg Businessweek with Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
Carol, if you've seen, heard, or even uttered the word vibe session, then you can thank our next guest.
Yes.
Okay?
I
Because
will.
she's the one who coined it. She's a former associate at Capital Group. She's now a TikTok star. She's a financial educator and commentator. She's a blogger. She's a Bloomberg opinion contributor. And she's the author of a new book. It's out now. It's called In This Economy, How Money and Markets Really Work. We got with us Kyla Scanlon. Kyla, welcome. How are you?
Oh, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
People are putting out books about the economy quite a bit. They're trying to answer a lot of the questions that people have, trying to explain this stuff. You take a different approach. What was the white space that you saw when you were sort of putting this all together?
Yeah, I mean, the book is largely inspired from the content that I do, which is meant to be like fun and accessible. And so the book has 60 illustrations. The language is also accessible. And so I just really wanted to write a foundational guide to the economy that was fun. And so that's what the book is meant to be.
Fun but smart, because these are important issues, right?
Right. Yeah. It talks about inflation, the labor market, GDP, all of those things. And so it's meant to talk about the important issues in a way that doesn't feel overbearing or complicated.
Well, what's your interaction? Like, I feel like I have a bunch of nieces that are probably in their 20s, like early 30s and stuff. And there are ones that are very accomplished too, and they'll be like, when it comes to money and all this stuff, like people feel lost. Why do you think so?
Oh, I mean, I think we do a disservice to people in terms of how we give them information about the economy.
Yeah.
I think it just can feel very convoluted, very complex. And I think oftentimes it's hard to get the right information that you need. And the economy is such a personal experience too. So a lot of people are like, I'd just rather avoid that than think about it. But I think if you give them the tools, like they'll know how to dig a hole or whatever. And so I think it's just overwhelming. And but if you distill things down in an accessible way, it'll make it a little less overwhelming.
All right, so how do you approach something like this? Because there's some really serious stuff in here, including monetary policy. So think, like, how did you kind of initially think about how you wanted to get into it?
Yeah. Well, so I rewrote the book 3 times. So
That's fair.
There was
You're a writer. That happens, right?
Yeah, no, it was a grind. But I like the whole idea was to use the illustrations as kind of a backbone of the book. And like if you buy the audiobook,
We're such a visual society, right?
Yeah.
Especially today.
Oh yeah, and if you buy the audiobook, there's a PDF. But yeah, the book starts with the economic kingdom, which is kind of like the tapestry of the economy, showing how everything is interconnected. Because I think that's like the most confusing part is like how do all these, like what is the Fed and what is monetary policy?
Why do I care, right?
Right, and how does that interact? So everything kind of stems from that first drawing, and then the rest of the book is sort of an exploration of all of those topics with like little jokes interspersed. And so yeah, it's meant to be fun.
I love that you go to the Federal Reserve, because I do feel like if you bring it up in certain circles, they're like, yeah, whatever. But you talk about interest rates, right? And then everybody comes alive.
Yeah. I think that people don't, it's not anybody's fault. Like economics education is not that accessible, to use that word quite a bit. But I think that you just have to talk about these things. And, I think part of the reason, to go to the vibe session topic, the part of the reason that people freak out is like, I live in a system that I don't understand, or I feel like I don't have the tools to understand. And that's, the Fed is really important to at least have a grasp on.
Can you talk a little bit about how you got into it? Because you were an associate at Capital Group earlier in your career. You also sold cars at one point.
Yeah.
But talk a little bit about, your education and then how you got into this.
Yeah. So I grew up in Kentucky, and I didn't even know you could major in economics until I got to college. And so for me, it was just kind of like, okay, there needs to be some sort of tool out there that people can access, like me when I was that age, that you can understand the world around you. And then when I was in college, I had a whole blog on like options trading. And so I've always wanted to bring people alongside a learning journey. And now it's really about the economy and just.
You didn't go to Wall Street.
Well, I guess Capital Group is like the buy side.
But you didn't stay there. I mean, your career could have been you could have been like a terminal subscriber,
I was at one point.
But you were exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So why didn't you stay with it?
So I graduated into the pandemic, and it was kind of like, it's a personal journey, right? But like for me, I was like, my life, I think, is about economics education. Like I really weirdly care about this so deeply, and I just wanted to bring people up to speed with the knowledge that I felt was important for them to get access to.
It's so interesting. I'm thinking when we're having this conversation, because it's also a time, with politics a little a little crazy, is that people are saying we need civic lessons again to really kind of understand how government works. But I also agree the same thing. Like, you're right, we're taught algebra, calculus, and all these different things, but really understanding how money works and flows and how the economy. I studied economics too, and it was because I was interested in like understanding how this all works, and it really gives you such a great understanding of your own picture, but just more broadly how it all plays together.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's super important, and like I said, I think if you don't understand it, it can be just really overwhelming. And so that's the goal of the book.
So what is the economic kingdom?
The economic kingdom is all
Start with that picture.
Yeah, it's all the castles, and so it's maybe like a little reductive of an image of the economy. You could probably spend several pages on it, but it's just meant to show the interconnectivity between everything. So there's a Federal Reserve castle or a monetary policy castle, like firing a cannon into inflation, meant to represent rate hikes, and yeah, it's just like I do think that economics is so fun, and whenever I say that to my friends, they're like, please get away from us. But I do think like it can be really fun and interesting, and it doesn't have to be so big, and it can have knowledge about it that is digestible.
Well, we're seeing the effects of it play out right now with the difference in the way that people feel versus what the economy is telling us about historically low unemployment, a stock market that is at records, but people just don't feel good about inflation. People don't feel good about their situation in poll after poll. At the end of the day, it's about vibes, you argue. So talk a little bit about vibes and the importance of vibes when it comes to thinking about the economy.
Yeah, and to caveat all the vibe discussion, like structural affordability is a massive issue. Like we have a housing crisis, healthcare, like childcare is up like 32% since 2019. Elder care is $10,000 a month. And so that's not meant to reduce the conversation about the issues that we're facing as a society that has an economy. But the polls are hard. But like there was a poll that was released that said that 55% of people think that we're in a recession, and 49% of people think the stock market is down.
Yeah, I think this was a Harris poll last week.
Harris Guardian, 49% think unemployment is at a record high, and it's like the opposite. Stock market's up 12%. We're not in a recession. Unemployment's at a record low. And so I think it really is like, yes, we can acknowledge that the economy is tough, and there are parts of it that are tough, but you also have to acknowledge an element of reality. And I think that's where this vibes conversation is really important. How people feel about the economy really, really matters.
Well, sentiment matters, right? We see it certainly in the financial markets. When you talk with individuals, and when you were thinking about this book, like what is the number one thing that people just kind of miss in kind of understanding how the economy works?
I mean, I think it's their importance within it. Like everything that we do is an economic transaction. Like I bought a cup of coffee this morning. That's an economic transaction. I took the subway here, economic transaction. And so I think people oftentimes will reduce their own importance in this big thing that we're all a part of.
You've got an entire chapter on here about housing and the American dream. We just had a story about this. It's one of the most read on the Bloomberg terminal about how that American dream is slipping away. What are your thoughts around owning versus renting right now?
Yeah, I think it's a really tough discussion. I think that it's really a wealth building discussion. So there's a chart from the Federal Reserve, the distribution of financial assets, that shows that the bottom 50% have all of their wealth tied into their home. The top 10% have stock and like business ownership. And so I think the way that we think about housing probably has to change. It's a speculative investment that we live in, and it has to probably be one of the two. It can't probably be both. And so I think that's kind of the conversation that we have to have around housing, but that's an extremely hard conversation.
It's so uniquely American, though.
Right.
I mean, in so many different parts of the world,
it's
just normal to rent for your entire life.
Yeah, and I think renting is probably the best option with mortgage rates so high. There's a lot of good studies on it. Like, renting gives you more flexibility. You're able to move around. You don't have the golden handcuff issue. But people want to own a home because that's the wealth building opportunity of the American dream.
Right. Generationally, like we've been told,
totally.
like that's the goal, right?
Yeah.
That's how you do it here, and that's how you build up wealth. In terms of, we're gonna take a break in a moment and then come back and talk some more. In terms of the chapters, is there one that was like the trickiest for you, or that you were like really stewed over, or didn't just rewrite it 3 times, but maybe even more?
Yeah, I mean, the problems chapter was hard because like you don't want to come off as really negative, and you also want to provide solutions to it's very easy to like sit and talk and be like, oh, things are bad, but it's much harder to provide proper solutions. And so I think it was hard to discuss the problems that we're facing because there are so many, but then the opportunities chapter was so much fun to write because there are ways to fix the issues we're facing.
The problems chapter is at the end of the book.
Yeah,
so.
it is.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
you know, you can read all the other stuff before you get to
You
it.
don't get to the problems right away.
I do,
If
though-
you're feeling like all you have is problems.
We're going to talk about the problems chapter when we come back, because there's some really interesting stuff in there about social media, about mental health in the economy,
Yeah.
the state of the American dream beyond just housing, economic inequality, media literacy, speaking of polls that make us think that everybody thinks we're in a recession.
What's really funny too is, and maybe not funny, but or maybe good that people are asking. So many people I feel like, and often of a younger generation, are like, "Do you have a good book that just kind of like puts it all together for me?" And one that's easily usable and accessible, because it does feel like you could just kind of pop a chapter for a while and just kind of sit with it and dwell with it.
We're back with Kyla Scanlon. She's the author of a new book, In This Economy, How Money and Markets Really Work. She's a TikTok star. She's a financial educator and commentator. She's a blogger. She's got a Substack. She's a contributor to
She
Bloomberg
doesn't
Opinion.
sleep.
Well, that's what I wanted to talk about. That's what I wanted to talk about here is sort
Not
of
sure
like
how she does it.
how this book deal all came together, because I'm wondering if you have the Substack, you have YouTube, you have TikTok, you have Instagram, you have Twitter /X/ whatever it's called right now. How did you get a book deal?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So I wrote this piece back in July 2022 about the Vibe session, and I didn't really think it would be any different than any of my other newsletter pieces, but then the New York Times was like, the opinion section was like, would you want to publish with us? And I was like, yeah. And then Penguin Random House reached out and they were like, have you ever thought about writing a book? And I wrote books all throughout my childhood. Like my first book was when I was 8 about a penguin. And so I was like, yes, of course I want to write a book.
Was
and
that
then,
when Penguin Random House published also?
I wish,
Perfect,
yeah.
right?
It was very, I'm not like super woo-woo, but I was like, that's pretty woo-woo.
Totally.
Yeah. And so that was how the book deal came about. And then I really wanted to provide a static information guide rather than social media videos.
What if a younger generation doesn't get it right, or people in general don't get it right and understand their role in the economy, there's a cost.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think there's a cost to like how we interact with one another, like the polarization. I think some of the polls are super disparaging and concerning. And then I think also like if you don't understand the economy, I don't think you understand the potential that you might have.
Right.
Like you kind of get stuck in certain places.
What do you mean by that? Carry that out for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just like if you don't understand like the power that you might have to move jobs, like the strength of the labor market relative to like quits and jolts, et cetera,
Right.
that could hold you back. So I think that's a big part of it. I think not understanding that inflation going down doesn't mean that prices are going down, right? The strength of the economy. And I think like mortgage rates are super important to understand, like why they're going up, when it's a good time to buy a home, et cetera.
What do you think, though, in terms of like we were talking about with mortgage rates and people think it's too high, it's too expensive, can't do the American dream. Having said that, historically, they're still kind of low.
Yeah. Well,
So
no,
how should we be thinking about that, or how do we teach about that?
well, I think it's like relative, right? Like right now they're really high relative to where they've been.
But the zero or the barely was the abnormal part, right?
Yeah. But you get used to the abnormal part, right? You get used to it.
Yeah,
and
that's
I
true.
think like we got very used
That's
to
true.
easy money. You see it with like the startup industry right now. They're really flailing around because money is very, very expensive.
Right.
And I think also like homes didn't used to be the place to go to make a bunch of money. Like I think it's from 1860 to 1960, they only grew by like 0.06%.
Yeah.
And now we really expect homes to do a lot of work in terms of building wealth. And so I think it's just all relative, and relative to where we've been, we're in a weird spot, but we're always in a weird spot.
Yeah,
And we do have these weird 30-year mortgage products here in the U.S. that
Yeah.
are like, kind of unique to us.
Yeah.
Also, the housing market, we could do an entire show
Oh, it's
just
so
about the housing
fascinating.
market.
Yeah.
I want to shift gears a little bit because I think a lot of people know you from your TikTok videos, especially post-Federal Reserve days, where you've been known to portray a one Jerome Powell on TikTok, and they're great. People love them. I love them. Have you heard from Jay Powell?
No, not directly.
Not directly.
Yeah,
Okay, what do you mean by not directly?
Well, so I've had the opportunity to interview Mary Daly, who's the president and CEO of the San Francisco Fed, and she hasn't like said that anything about Jerome Powell, like knowing about the videos, but I know her, and that's like second degree, and she's great. I really enjoy interviewing her.
She hasn't said, "Hey, Jay, kind of like it."
He does. So he's on the terminal. He's on the terminal. So you can, and you're a Bloomberg Opinion contributor.
Yeah.
So you can always.
If he wants to say hi, I'd love to chat.
But not yet. No Jay Powell yet.
No.
Who knows? Maybe when he writes his memoir,
Yeah.
you'll make an appearance. Who knows?
You do write about problems. What did you want to do with that? And just
why
remind us.
I
Yeah.
wrote about
Yeah.
problems. I mean, I think the big thing with the problem section is to address. I think it's really important to like recognize, like you should feel the way that you do, and like there is validity to the feelings that you're having about like social media, the algorithms, the loneliness crisis, mental health, etc. Like you have to talk about problems, but then you also have to talk about solutions. And so that's why I paired problems and opportunities together, because I think it's doing a disservice to not talk about the issues that we're facing.
So talk about the social media side of this, because you do have a section in the chapter on problems just about social media making it worse. One challenge with that in your life, I would imagine, is that you have to be on social media and you have to be very visible because that's how you build your brand. That's how you build your business. What's been your experience with social?
I mean, it's been great. Like, I don't think I'd be in this room without social media. So, like, I have to congratulate it for that. But then I think the way that I think about social media is that a lot of bad things do come from it. And that's why you have to create good things on social media to counteract the bad things. And so that's why I'm on social media and I do social media videos, is because that's where people go for news. That's where people get their information. And so you have to be where people are, especially if you want to educate them about the economy. And so that's how I think about social media.
How do you think that it kind of plays out eventually, that we, social media, in terms of acknowledging that my data, your data, Tim's data is really valuable? It's what makes them tick, and it's what's made them into the largest market cap companies out there. Like, how does that play out eventually? Like, do we get recognition at some point for all? No, seriously.
No,
right?
I think you're right. I mean, there's been a lot of conversations about like getting paid for the data usage. I mean, I think it's kind of absurd that they're able to like sell it and benefit so bigly from that, and then you don't really have a say in where it goes and what you're being sold on. And I think that
or just sold more stuff and like bombarded more stuff to get more data.
And I think that's the issue, is that people are very tired of being constantly sold to. Like, everything is an advertisement, the attention economy, like your eyeballs are commodities. And I think that creates a lot of exhaustion under the surface.
I'm wondering about economic decisions that you kind of make every day now that you didn't make before you wrote this book. Like, how has looking into this stuff changed your own behavior?
Oh, I mean, I think that for me, I've always been sort of aware of what's going on. But I think now I pay attention to what people are saying a little bit more in terms of the book, like what they're thinking about inflation. Because I think that you have to, I used to be very data driven, and I used to be like, inflation is going down and you should feel better. But now I'm much more likely to weigh opinion versus data. And I've, because I've been, there's a lot of good papers on scrutinizing the data. Like, is the data actually representative? And of course, data is a tapestry, right? Like, we look at a lot of data points to figure out what's going on. But I think that it just deserves a little bit closer looking too.
No, you do think about, sentiment, how important it is. But I do also wonder, we're a data-driven company, and there are data points that do tell what is going on, right? So there's that balance of, same thing like, I always feel like in journalism, you can always find the data points to tell any story.
Oh, sure.
But there is also truth and information, right?
Yeah.
That's actually a representative of what's happening.
Yeah, and I think that's why the Harris Guardian poll was so disheartening to see.
Yeah.
And you have to take polls with a grain of salt. But like to see that people think that the stock market is going down when it's just objectively not, like that's really important to understand. And like that's where reality is. You can't have an opinion on things that are objectively true, and I think that's where that conversation gets really hairy. Yeah,
you can debate the valuation and maybe say it's not right,
sure.
But the move is the move, right?
Right.
It's just kind of this wacky time. Really cool book. Like I said, I feel like I have a million people in my life that I want to give this to, because I think it's a really useful book in terms of understanding a lot of stuff. Yeah. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Good stuff.
Kyla Scanlon is the author of In This Economy, How Money and Markets Really Work. The book out today. She's a TikTok star and a contributor to Bloomberg Opinion, as well as a financial educator, and so much more. U.S. employers are hiring at the slowest pace in nearly a decade, excluding a brief dip during the early pandemic, according to the BLS. So, Carol, unemployment is low, yes, but there's been significant job growth in certain areas, of course, healthcare. However, getting on a path to a well-paid job in finance, consulting, and tech, which are top destinations for ambitious students, it's getting more difficult with greater competition for fewer entry-level positions.
I am hearing that. So recent grads, may have to be more flexible when it comes to finding a gig. Enter Instawork. It's a job hiring platform that connects businesses with hourly workers across the United States. Think bartending, dishwashing, serving at events, and more. A lot of hospitality, it sounds like, Tim.
Yeah, Caban is head of strategic communications over at Instawork. She joins us from Washington, D.C. Kira, good to have you with us this afternoon. Before we get into the platform, you've got a great view of the economy from your perch because you guys do operate across the United States. And it's a two-sided platform. So you've got businesses on one side using the platform, and then you've also on the other side got folks who are looking for that work. What are you seeing right now on the platform in terms of the economy? Who's looking for work? Who's hiring? And on the other side, who's available for work?
So what we're seeing is hospitality and other industries like warehousing and retail are booming. Think about hospitality, particularly heading into the summer season. A lot of big name artists have announced concert series for the summer. And so the business around there are going to be looking for people to help staff their locations. Think restaurants, think the stadiums where these concerts are going to be happening. They're going to need support to handle that increased demand. And so what we're seeing is hourly workers like on, Instawork or other associated platforms. They're really great ways to find these jobs that you can pick a shift tonight, tomorrow, a month from now. And it's a really great way to match businesses' needs with people who are looking for that type of work. And so being a marketplace like that, we're able to bring people together in a meaningful way and kind of hit both sides of that marketplace meaningfully.
Who are people looking for that type of work? Carol and I have had this conversation quite a bit in recent months, in recent years. Like when you look at the service industry, for example, which is an industry that your platform serves, historically, like years ago, this was an industry where people spent a few years and then moved on to something else. But increasingly, it's turning into a career for people. Not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, I'm saying, but it's these jobs are more permanent than they've been in the past. What are the ages of the folks that you're seeing use the app and being connected to these jobs?
So we see some interesting data across the platform. Typically, most of the shifts are being picked up by a cohort between 25 and 34 years of age. But closely behind that is your middle-aged 40s and 50s who are picking up shifts. But what we also see that's interesting is in a lot of geographical locations as well, national, the demographics between men and women are split almost equally. And so I think people are just looking for a way to make that extra money. We recently did a survey of the people who are using the platform to find work, and 75% of those survey respondents said that they were using that money to pay for essentials. So things are just expensive. Going to the movies is expensive. Travel is expensive. Eggs, gas, all of the things that we all pay for just seems to be getting much more expensive. And people are just looking for ways to offset that without having to break the bank, right? And so I think people are just looking for the side hustle or ways that they can have control over their income levels while being able to manage daycare, elderly parents, whatever other obligations they may have in their day-to-day lives.
We love data and looking at time series data over quite a long time to understand trends here. So you've got 40 plus markets in North America. You got 6 million hourly workers in the network. You've got billions of data signals that help connect businesses to workers and workers to businesses. You've been around since 2015. I'm wondering how things have changed in the last 9 years. Like, what are the trends that you're seeing change in the time that the platform has been around?
So what's interesting is you have this caveat with the pandemic where hospitality and a lot of the in-person type industries that we serve shut down. But immediately following that, we were seeing 5x, 10x growth, particularly with the number of people looking for work in a flexible way. And so over the last couple of years, in 2020, we may have had 1 million people using the app, and we're north of 6 million now. And so that we've definitely struck a chord, and there's that appetite for flexibility and when I work, how I work, where I work, and what industries do I serve. And honestly, if there's skills that they want to tap into, they have the way to do that. But if they want to try something completely different, the opportunities are there for them. So it's just a different mentality for working versus a traditional 9 to 5. And I think people have an appetite for that being in the driver's seat a little bit more.
Hey, you guys have been around, since I think 2015, and I am curious. So you were here before the pandemic, coming off of obviously the great financial crisis about 7 years or so. I'm just curious how has the data points changed dramatically pre-pandemic versus what you're seeing today in terms of the type of activity about people needing these kind of part-time work, if you will?
So it's an interesting evolution. Before the pandemic, Instawork was only focused on hospitality, the mom and pop restaurants, maybe some dining facilities. And when the pandemic hit, all of that shut down. So from a business perspective, we had to get creative and figure out what are the industries that were really thriving. It was the warehouse, it was online retail, e-commerce. And so that's where we invested a lot of our time and energy during the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And then on the heels of that, watching hospitality slowly trickle back, the businesses are slowly reopening, but they also changed their models. A lot of you can pick up, dinner on the go or take out at restaurants that normally didn't have those services. And so we wanted to make sure that we were addressing the needs of those businesses at that time. And that has continued to evolve. One of the things that we just make sure that we do is take a look at the business needs and use the data that we have on the hourly workers in our network to make sure that we're matching them with people who can meet their need.
Let's talk. Sorry, I just want to jump in. We have about a minute left here, and I just want to talk wages because obviously you've seen significant wage pressures since 2015. What are going? Look, it depends on the markets you're in. You're in 40 markets. What are typical wages that you're seeing on the platform?
So across the country, the average on the Instawork platform is about $20 an hour. Now, again, that caveat, it's going to change based on the location that you're in and the position that you're taking. But $20 is a good ballpark. And you're going to have some areas that are a little bit south of that and some that are a little bit north. But if you're looking to get started or you're looking to dig into, into this a little bit more, $20 is a good place to start.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate you joining us on the show today. It's a cool platform, Instawork, 6 million different folks on it. Are you okay, Carol?
Yeah.
She's coughing. My
water went down
the pipe. She's got water though. She's okay. 6 million people on the platform. It connects businesses to workers, and they've got operating right now in 40 different markets around the U.S. Caban, head of strategic communications over at Instawork.